I'm Melissa Washington, Senior Vice President and ComEd's Chief Customer Officer. Thank you for joining today's webinar. At ComEd, we are committed to a cleaner energy future in Illinois and want to serve as a partner and resource as it relates to emerging technologies that are important to your business. Beneficial electrification, and specifically fleet electrification, is a perfect example of these emerging technologies. If your goal is to transition from conventionally fueled vehicles to battery electric vehicles, there are several important elements to understand. You may be familiar with some of these issues from your existing operations, but new factors that are specific to EVs can include choosing the right infrastructure for your fleet, utility infrastructure for your fleet, system upgrades, understanding your electric vehicle supply equipment options, also known as EVSE, purchasing electricity for your fleet, and managing your EV charging costs. Previously, in our last webinar, Angela Tin from the American Lung Association explained how the adaptation of electric vehicles will result in cleaner air and provide health benefits for all. That is why our highest priorities are centered on improving the environment. For instance, combating climate change is job one, and we aim to do this by achieving 100% clean and renewable energy. The Clean and Equitable Jobs Act has already put us on this path and further supports our states, our cities, and ComEd's own commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions consistent with the United Nations Paris Agreement. By doing that, we will lift up communities in need. Many of these communities are impacted by poor air quality generated from high levels of diesel emissions in Chicago's freight hubs, where rail yards, warehouses, and intermodal facilities are concentrated. Commonly, inner city and lower income neighborhoods are most impacted. We need to increase access to clean energy for all customers, and particularly in these neighborhoods. We need to continue to build on the strength of the smart grid and other investments that have increased our reliability by 70% and dramatically increased customer satisfaction. It's because of the stronger, more flexible digital grid platform that we are able to bring more renewable energy onto the system. We need to leverage it fully to drive continuous improvement, resilience, and innovation that meets the evolving needs of customers. And finally, we're focused on putting clean energy to work by using clean energy to power the transformation of the transportation sector and industrial processes. This will create new opportunities for you, the largest commercial and industrial customers in our region and the municipalities in which you operate. This will support your goals at a time when expectations of your customers are changing, as they place a higher value on doing business with companies that adopt sustainable energy practices, including how you use clean energy to run your business. These changing interests present opportunities to distinguish yourself from competitors, attract talent, and grow your business. As you know, the effort to electrify transportation is really gaining traction. For instance, Amazon has set a goal to deploy 10,000 new electric delivery vans made by Rivian in 2022, and 100,000 by 2030. Walmart has set a goal of zero emissions in their operations by 2040. It intends to reach this goal in part by electrifying their vehicles, including long-haul trucks. Walmart will be transitioning to low-impact refrigerants by cooling and electrifying their heating in their stores, clubs, data centers, distribution centers, and all this will be done by 2040. They have a goal to get to 100% renewable energy by 2035. And right here at ComEd, we plan to electrify 30% of our fleet by 2025. with the ultimate goal of electrifying 50% of our fleet by 2030, resulting in additional reduction of 29,000 metric tons of greenhouse gases. This reduces fuel and maintenance costs, and it also creates savings that will be passed on to customers. Of course, I can go on, but like you, I'm eager to hear and learn more from our panelists today. So I'll stop right now by just thanking you again for joining us on this drive to a cleaner energy future. We're here to support you every step of the way. We hope you take away from today's discussion the understanding of our process for new services so you too can complete your EV project on time and have the knowledge of how to comprehensively take advantage of the new energy law that will benefit communities of Illinois now and well into the future. Let me now pass the baton to India James, Director of Large Customer Services.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to ComEd's webinar, Driving Toward a Clean Energy Future. My name is India James, and I'm Director of Large Customer Services at ComEd. Beneficial electrification is a topic of great interest to a number of businesses and industries, as well as our health, public policy, and municipal sectors. Beneficial electrification, especially as it pertains to the transportation sector, aims to improve our environment and air quality in our communities. It also enables large commercial and industrial customers to demonstrate environmental leadership and supports their sustainability and performance goals. Today, we've assembled two expert panels. The first will focus on meeting your electrification needs through early strategic engagement and understanding our processes and guidelines. Panelists include Sharon Pleskis, ComEd's Director of Utility Operations, and Bill Philroy, ComEd's Vice President of Engineering at Smart Grid. We'll have time after each panel today for Q&A, so please take advantage of the opportunity. We want you to walk away from today's presentation with a well-informed understanding of beneficial electrification and how we can help you realize its full potential. It's now my pleasure to introduce our first panel by introducing Sharon and Bill. Sharon and Bill, great to be here with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning. Sharon, why don't we start with you if it's okay? You're the Director of Distribution Operations Strategic Support, which encompasses businesses, particularly new business projects, and large projects in particular. As customers are looking to add load onto the system, their requests come straight to your organization. Can you walk me through what that process looks like?
Yes, the best ways to get started, per our perspective, is really to have the customer call into our new business call center. The customer can also choose to go to ComEd.com and submit a request through the new business portal. When that occurs, our new business customer service rep will work with the customer to create a service request. A service request could go on an existing account, but if the account is going to be new, they will need to have the tax ID of the ownership's property. At this point, it is very helpful for the customer to also provide us with a one-line showing the design and also a completed application. Once all this information is submitted, it will be verified and will be assigned to a ComEd project engineer. The ComEd engineer will notify the customer in about 48 hours. And the first thing they're going to do is work with the customer to really understand the customer's load and what is needed so we can ensure we get the right equipment to be installed for the customer's needs. What we'll do is we'll diversify or we'll break up the load the customer submits. And that's important because it has to be representative of a steady state and what they would use on a day-to-day basis. We're able to do this because we know that not all customers' loads are the same each day or run at the same rate. For example, not all of the wall outlets are going to be 100% in use at all times. So what we do is we apply some engineering principles, and we also apply some historic trends to come up with finding the right loading and the right type of connection based on past historic trends. We also know that during the heating cycle in winter and the cooling cycle in summer, that those run parallel. The loads won't occur at the same time. So we make sure we don't double count those. That principle applies the same to other customers' needs, such as water heaters or elevators or even the electrical chargers for vehicles. We want to make sure that we go through each load type and we break that down to find the right size. When we get smaller load requests, we assess whether existing transformers can meet the need, and we can do connections to those, and sometimes we have to upgrade our transformers, and we can proceed to do that. But if the load is large enough, which depends on the available voltage in the area and also what is the requested voltages from the customer, then we may have to involve our capacity planning department. Our capacity planning team is needed to evaluate how the grid can serve the new customer's load request.
Bill, Sharon mentioned that your department becomes engaged in the process for larger requests. Can you tell us a little bit more about what your part of the organization does and then how you handle these types of requests?
Sure. Capacity planning is responsible for planning the mainline configuration of the distribution system and ensuring that there's sufficient capacity to serve system load during normal and contingency conditions throughout the seasons. Capacity planning develops a 5-year infrastructure plan to incrementally reinforce the distribution system as required to meet load projections. The capacity planning process first starts off with the new business engineer contacts capacity planning for all the load additions greater than a threshold determined by the feeder's primary voltage. Capacity planning studies the impact of the proposed load addition, including sufficient capacity and its effects on automation, voltage optimization, and the operability of the system in the area. If capacity planning determines that the load addition can be accommodated without any system upgrade work, then new business proceeds with the design of the on-site facilities required to connect the new additional load. If capacity planning determines that off-site system upgrade work is required to connect the new additional load, then a project diagram, normally referred to as a PD, is developed to describe the scope of the required off-site and on-site work. Examples include new feeders or new substation transformers. In some situations, the customer may be required to fund a portion of the off-site scope through a deposit, for example, Rider DE, which we intend to refund over time as the customer's load materializes. The Rider DE process has become much more customer-friendly in the past few years, and the number of customers that need to provide a deposit has gone down significantly. New business designs and project manages the off-site and on-site work.
Interesting. Sharon, have you seen a shift in the number of these requests over the past year or two?
Yes, you know, when the pandemic hit, initially that did disrupt some of the flow of new business. We did see a decrease. But after that initial pandemic, we are seeing our activity return to the normal level. But we have to remember, the market is always changing and it's always evolving. And it really has to do with demographics and other societal factors. So it's not just the pandemic that changes the market. What we've seen over the last 2 years for new business is we're seeing more data centers in our service territory. We're still seeing a few office facilities or buildings taking place and being built, especially in the downtown Chicago area. But the one thing that we are seeing is really all sorts of customers that are starting to include the vehicle charging stations in their plan. Now, how each customer approaches it is different, and their needs are very unique. So ComEd will work with all of our customers to achieve the best solution. Requests for EVs a couple years ago were very few of them. And when we first started getting them, we really had to understand how to diversify that load. But now the characteristics we have, it really depends on the number of chargers, the level of charging, and what pattern and timing the customer is going to need. Especially in our larger projects, we're seeing more and more requests for vehicle chargers. And this is essentially becoming the norm. It takes a while to engineer these large projects. And what we're also seeing is over time now, we began the design on some projects, but customers are coming to us pretty far along, and they're asking us to go back and look at how they can include the vehicle charging. We do this before the design is complete, and of course, before we construct.
So how does ComEd handle those requests for electric vehicle charging?
Yeah, so the request that I explained earlier, it's really the same process. The main difference is, though, with vehicle charging requests coming through, you typically have a shorter amount of time, but you could add a substantial load amount into the system. But aside from the timeline, designs can be variable. It is important that you engage ComEd as early as possible, and we can look at your load specifics that you have. And that again goes back to the quantity and the type of charger you have and how it's going to be utilized. For example, are you building a garage and you're going to have a fleet of vehicles that are being charged overnight? Or are you simply adding some vehicle chargers to a building that your customers may be using, or even some of the public? All of these factors are accounted in determining how we can get the right equipment and have our grid support you. Sometimes the timeliness can be relatively short. And as I mentioned, if you have design changes that come last minute, that can compound a problem. So in such situations, ComEd might have trouble meeting those timelines. So especially if the load is a higher load that you're requesting and we have to do some off-site work to prepare for it.
Okay. Well, what kind of timeline, Bill, can customers expect to see if their request involves any off-site work?
Yeah, if there's existing ComEd feeders are required to be upgraded or extended, or if a new feeder needs to be installed, this can take upwards of 12 months, and the timeline can be highly dependent on the ease of obtaining easements and/or permits. If substation upgrades, a new substation transformer or other high voltage work is required, this can take upwards of 24 months and also involve some additional groups like transmission planning and project management.
So Sharon, in a best case scenario where capacity planning determines that there's no impact to the feeder or the request doesn't even rise to that level, what kind of timeline can customers expect to see for on-site work?
India, there's still going to be a lot of variables that can affect that answer. So for the sake of this conversation, let's start with just having the simplest request, and we'll go to what's going to be more complex. So for the most straightforward connection on our system, that would be connecting to an existing overhead or underground transformer. That, if we do not need to do a capacity analysis, if once the customer facilities are complete, we can get that connection done in 2 weeks. One thing to note, though, that is usually not the case for our larger commercial or industrial customers. If we have smaller jobs where we need to set an overhead pole, that can take about 2 to 4 months to set a pole and to hang a new transformer. And if we need to serve the customer by adding a pad mount transformer, and a pad mount transformer is those green boxes that you see on the ground, those can take up to 4 to 6 months in that kind of range. If we have to relocate some of the lines, that can even take 6 to 9 months. The most complex is probably when we do a design, when we design a vault that's in a customer's building. Those overall projects will take 12 to 14 months. So I know when you hear me saying everywhere from 2 weeks to 14 months, that can seem very daunting in a lot of different scenarios. But I do want to explain why it's important and why they're so different. We need time for the designers to coordinate with the customers. We need to have all of the floor plans, the load, and the design to make sure that we have the right design. Also, we need to order the material. And for these larger jobs like vaults, the material could have a long lead time. We also have to obtain permits from municipalities and sometimes easements. Once we get all that, when the customer signs the contract, we ultimately are able to do the construction of the project. Another thing to note is sometimes there's external factors that play into this that are very timely, and that's permitting by other entities that we might have, especially if we have to install facilities into our right-of-way. These are several different scenarios, and they're only representative of projects. Each project is going to have its unique targets and its unique challenges. But in general, this is how work flows for ComEd. And that's why it's so important for you to reach out and to contact ComEd as early in the project as you can. Sometimes each project might have a unique situation or a unique condition, and it's going to take ComEd engineers working with the project engineers to discuss those and to really narrow it down to the best solution. It really is a give and take for some of these larger jobs. And for small meter fittings, they're easy to do. But when we build a whole vault room in a customer building, we want to make sure that the infrastructure is ready per our specifications. And we won't finalize the connections on the ComEd side until it is. And that's important because we want to make sure that we hold fast to this principle, because we are concerned about the reliability of the service to that specific customer, but we're also concerned about the reliability of other customers that may be on that line because our grid is connected. One of the most important things to also note, and why it's so important to make sure that we follow construction standards and specifications, is for safety. Safety is our top priority, and our operators and construction workers respond to outages 24 hours a day. And we need to ensure that we have the same standards, the same specifications. It's essential in maintaining our system and our grid. And while it could be frustrating to some customers that we don't allow variances, it's very important for those three reasons.
Those interdependencies are really important. Thank you. Thank you for explaining that, Sharon. Bill, my next question's for you. Are there any differences in a request for electric vehicle charging as opposed to any other load request that a customer might make?
Yeah, in many ways, requests for electric vehicle charging are very similar to other load requests. A customer submits a service application with an expected in-service date, a preferred service voltage, and a list and size of the loads being added. For an EV service application, it's important to have an accurate count of the number of level 2 or level 3 chargers. Additionally, new business capacity planning will have a discussion with the customer regarding expecting charging patterns in order to understand the expected demand. These discussions will also help to understand duration and timing of the added load, which could become more important in the future if managed charging can be implemented.
That's great to know. Sharon, as we talk about charging and the infrastructure itself, it's good to understand cost around it. Could you tell me from your perspective what an associated cost might be for a customer that's interested in adding beneficial electrification to their site?
Yeah, similar to how I just spoke on that designs are made to order for the customer, our costs follow the same principle. Since we are a regulated utility, each design is evaluated on its own merit and a tariff is applied to make sure we're charging appropriately. The same goes for designs, including beneficial electrification. Final costs will be derived from the design, so we cannot finalize the cost until we have that complete design. I know I keep mentioning it, why it's so important to involve new business, so critically engage us upfront, because we can have our engineers work with your project managers to ensure we put a timeline together to meet a customer schedule. Since each design and application is unique, it's hard for me to do a broad brush and tell you about what it would cost, but I can tell you a couple of key points in our process. At the beginning of the project, new business is going to request an engineering deposit. And that deposit will go towards the final cost of the project if and when it completes. It's possible that the customer will receive a partial or a full refund, depending if the design has any non-standard charges. The deposit is really intended to cover our engineering efforts up front in case the project is canceled. Once the design is complete, we will look for the standard service for the customer. Standard services are provided by ComEd, not the customer, and they are collected through a base rate per our tariffs. It's important to note that we are always looking for the least cost reliable solutions as a standard service. But there could be some logistic aspects on the customer's team's plans that drive some non-standard costs into what a customer thinks would be a standard project. I'll give you an example. There are several aspects to our charging policies, which is too much to really go into in this detail. But what we do look for that standard service is to make sure you have that one point of service. So if a customer was to install a transformer at one end of their parking lot to feed their building, and they came back and we needed to install another transformer to serve the vehicle charging stations at the other side of their property, this would be a standard charge. And that's because they have 2 points of service instead of that 1 point. One of the things that we do look at for standard services, we apply 2 different formulas for that. One of that is a rental formula, and that goes to a monthly cost, and it pays for non-standard rental of equipment costs and those extra service points. The second is a one-time payment, and we call it a kayak formula that we apply. And that is really for non-standard labor and other materials to calculate that single payment. These are separate from the rider DE costs that Bill mentioned earlier. And the DE is for standard off-site work. We work very closely with our rates and our capacity planning team to ensure that these charges are applied per our obligations. As requests come in, we evaluate them, and we will work with the project team and consult with them to determine the financial impacts they have to designs that are being considered.
So Bill, what type of challenges does your team capacity planning face when trying to plan our distribution system to prepare for an increase in electric vehicles?
Well, we anticipate that electrification will result in significant load growth that will require additional investment beyond what we would project without electrification. Information from customers are considering electrification helps ComEd to project where on our system this load growth will occur. Also, without insight into how our customers operate their vehicles and where and when they plan to charge them, we don't know if that charging will occur when local system load is low or when it's at its peak. Early engagement from the customers helps us understand what the system impacts will be from their project. This enables us to prepare for that impact and helps us to meet customer project timelines for their specific design solutions.
That's really helpful for our customers to know. Sharon, for the specific design solutions that you and Bill have been talking about, is there any different approach to metering that can be used for electric vehicle charging?
That's a great question, India. A lot of times with emerging technology, it takes time for the market to sort out the best solution to that opportunity. But for ComEd, this is fairly straightforward. And that's because reselling of power is not permitted. So that means that a ComEd meter needs to go upstream of any of the chargers. And some entity has to pay for that, as opposed to a pay per charge application. The variance just really comes on what the customer's decision is to meet this requirement. Do they want to source it at the switchboard? Do they want it separate from other metering, or they could source, or they can tell the difference from the other buildings' power loads like elevators, heaters, or do they want to combine it in one? It really will be the owner's decision and what best fits their future need for this site. One of the biggest challenges we do have, though, is we don't know what's going to happen in the future. By nature, it's unknown. So we do not know the opportunities or initiatives that could make themselves available in the future, or what legislation or tariff updates there could be.
Bill, could you expand on this and explain how EV charging can impact the system differently depending on how the fleet operates?
Sure. Take an example where two very similar fleets have different patterns. The first fleet might operate in a way where all the vehicles have a very similar start and stop times. For that fleet, we can project that these vehicles will all be charging at the same time and that the service will have a higher peak load with a shorter duration. Now take a second fleet where the vehicles in the fleet return to charge at different times. This will result in a lower peak load spread out over a longer duration.
As we close out this panel discussion, which has been really helpful for our customers, big and small alike, I'd like both of you to give perspective on this last question. We are in the early stages of the electrification movement, and you've mentioned that it's difficult at this point to accurately anticipate when and where electrification might take place. What else can we do to prepare from your perspective at this early stage? Sharon, if you wouldn't mind answering first.
Sure. The grid is an ever-changing landscape, and load availability is always at a premium. It's really first come and first served to some degree. So the best thing that I would tell a customer, and from a new business standpoint, is to engage us early. Even if the work is farther out in your timeline, it could be beneficial to have that high-level conversation with the new business engineering department as you begin to plan. We are always looking to bundle opportunities for adjacent projects, and the more tangible data that we have on what's happening in development, the more coordinated our efforts could be to make the design and manage solutions for our customers.
Bill, your thoughts?
Well, while it's difficult to project where pockets of electrification will occur, capacity planning is developing preliminary long-range electrification forecasts to gain a better understanding of the potential impact on system load. We are also upgrading our forecasting and planning tools to engineering tools to set us up for the upcoming wave of electrification. Engaging in industry fleet electrification research projects through EPRI to gain additional insights into the distribution system's readiness for electrification and forecasting future fleet electrification hotspots. These research projects also involve several other electric utilities, which helps us to benchmark and learn from their electrification experiences. We are working with other ComEd departments to implement methods to streamline the processing of electrification requests. And we're investigating a means and applications of managed charging to mitigate EV grid impact.
Sharon, Bill, I'm sure many of our customers want to hear more about this as you've walked through the process and some of the challenges. Why don't we move into the chat? I know customers have been dropping some questions in. Let's pause and take some from the audience. Looks like we have our first question, and I'll open this up for either Bill or Sharon, whichever of you would like to answer this. We have a question from someone that works for a school district, and they're asking if the school installed vehicle chargers, who would pay for the installation and electrical costs? Could you help customers understand that process a little bit better?
Hi, Charlotte. I saw the question pop up. As I mentioned earlier when I was answering one of the questions, right now there does need to be an entity that is assigned to that account. So whoever is going to open up that account, it may be the school district, they're going to be the ones paying for it now. In the future, there could be some incentives that will be coming, but there always has to be that one entity or that owner of that account.
Okay, excellent. Sharon, you also spoke a little bit earlier around costs for electrification as well. Is there anything that you could highlight for customers related to the implementation cost at perhaps a manufacturing facility? I
wish I could give a specific answer for manufacturing. Similar to what I said in one of my answers to the questions, it really depends on the type of chargers and the setup you're going to have. If you're installing a second point of service, that is going to be a non-standard fee, and that cost is going to be higher. The best thing that you could do is, as you're starting this journey, is to contact ComEd. You give us a call at our new business number, and we could have a project engineer call you back and talk you through and talk about what you think the design is going to be, and also the load that you're going to be adding.
Excellent. Thank you, Sharon. And Bill, I'll direct this next audience question at you. We have a question, it looks like, from one of our municipal customers that might be thinking about putting chargers in at one of their locations. They're asking about our experience adding EV charging stations to villages. Could you talk a little bit about maybe the capacity planning process and what that means for customers?
Yeah, I think that still have to submit it into new business to see, what's all going on and how many of them we're going to put in. I noticed some of the chat questions, 5,000 small village, 5,000 interested here. Just make sure you touch base with new business, and new business will get in touch with, transparently with capacity planning. And we'll go ahead and look at all that and see if we can put that in, and have to make some additions to our capacity in that area there. That could mean, in installing a new feeder, like I said before, up all the way up to and upgrading a substation, maybe a new transformer there.
Excellent. I see we've also gotten a few questions about rebates and incentives. We have a really exciting panel coming up next. So I'm going to pause on answering some of those questions because they may get answered in our next conversation. But I do want to encourage you to make sure that you're reaching out to ComEd representative. We can help you navigate that process as well. Bill, I'm going to direct this last question towards you before we move into that next panel conversation, which is just, how is ComEd preparing for the future? We spoke a lot about electrification this morning. From your perspective, what are we doing to prepare?
Yeah, we're developing future grid plans to address imminent grid and customer needs that will require enabling additional capabilities and making further investments. To enable analytics capabilities and real-time monitoring and management of DERs, EV charging stations, and other intelligent devices, sophisticated information systems and additional infrastructure will need to be deployed. We're looking at deployment of sensors, communications, and enterprise systems will enable collection and processing of data at the service transformer and DER level. This data will then be critical to the implementation of systems like an advanced distribution management system. You've heard ADMS, or Distributed Energy Resource Management System, DERMS, throughout the service territory. ADMS brings SCADA to the distribution circuit and enables monitoring of field apparatus, loadings, and voltage levels in real time, and to operate our switches and other controllable devices. It also brings advanced analytics such as network analysis and optimization to the table to allow grid operators to keep grid conditions within safe parameters and react to changing conditions. DERMS provides communications monitoring and control of DER, such as behind the meter battery energy storage or smart EV charging. DERMS will allow the grid operator, with their owner's consent, to participate to enhance reliability, improve economics, and enable higher DER presentation. In addition to ADMS and DERMS, ComEd will continue to invest in our foundational utility assets, substations, transformers, and lines, and initiate demonstration projects of new technologies and capabilities that will provide a higher level of service for our customers. And then the last thing I want to say, we will respond to all the unanswered questions following this webinar. If you're looking for anything specific, please reach out to your ComEd representative. But before I conclude my comments today, I wanted to take a moment to discuss an important process that's currently underway at the Illinois Commerce Commission. As you are well aware, Illinois is at a critical point in the development of clean energy future for all of our communities. The state recently enacted one of the most progressive clean energy laws in the country. The law includes carbon emission reduction targets, renewable energy procurement requirements, and provisions designated to accelerate the deployment of clean energy sources like solar and the adoption of clean technologies, including EV. At the center of the new law is equity and transparency, clean air, jobs, grid enhancements, but must be for all communities, not just a privileged few. And the mechanisms in place for achieving these goals must be transparent and open to stakeholder involvement. In furtherance of these objectives, the Illinois Commerce Commission is hosting, for the first time ever in the state of Illinois, stakeholder workshops to discuss multi-year grid planning. These ICC-hosted workshops began in late December and continue until the middle of May. Thus far, dozens of stakeholders have participated, and numerous parties made short presentations sharing the priorities of their constituents and their vision for the future of the grid. Issues that have been raised include reliability, resiliency, affordability, economic development and job growth, and grid planning to support clean energy resources and broad adoption of electric vehicles. The process is open to all, and I encourage you as leaders in the community to actively participate in these workshops to ensure the voice of your communities is heard. The next workshop will be held later in April. We encourage your participation. More information on the clean energy law, the grid planning process, and the workshops can be found on the ComEd webpage and can be provided to you by your ComEd representative. And then I look forward to hearing from you at the workshops.
Now it's my pleasure to begin our second panel by introducing Michael Fountain, ComEd's Vice President of Government Affairs, and Philroy, ComEd's Senior Manager of Energy Policy. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. My name is Philroy, and I serve as Director of External Affairs here at ComEd. As you are all aware, a large new energy bill was signed into law by Governor Pritzker last fall, and we're really fortunate to have my colleague, Michael Fountain, here with us. And Michael, I was wondering if you could introduce yourself to our audience and also tell us a bit about how that law, which seemed many years in the making, finally got to the finish line.
Thank you, Philip. It's good to see you. My name is Michael Fountain. I am the Vice President of Legislative Affairs here at ComEd, and I want to thank all the attendees for sharing their valuable time with us today. I need to let you know that I'm coming to you from Springfield, working on a few things here, so there's a possibility I might get called away as we transition to our Q&A portion. But to your requests, Philip, regarding the new law, you are correct. Several years, many iterations, but it finally got done. The state's comprehensive energy package, now known as the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, also in statute as the Energy Transition Act of 2021, passed the House on September 9th of last year, and out of the Senate 4 days later on September 13th, and was signed by the governor 2 days later, September 15th, 2021, and is now the law of the land as Public Act 102-0662. And as you know, Philip, the ComEd business plan focuses on our commitment to clean energy, our desire to help advance the adoption of electric vehicles, and it focuses on our role in uplifting communities, in addition to our desire to strengthen to a more reliable and resilient grid, while bringing more renewables onto the system. This law now sets the path beyond what was to the next level of clean energy and what can be. Through the entire process, we have been discussing a comprehensive energy bill, because in order to achieve the 100% clean energy goals of the state, there had to be many parties engaged in compromise, including the governor, the Senate president, the House Speaker, the House and Senate energy negotiators, labor, environmentalists, and the solar industry. And I would add, the U.S. Secretary of Energy personally spoke with the governor, Senate president, and House Speaker to congratulate them on the passage of this bill as a national model regarding the plans to have an emission-free state by 2045.
Right. And when this bill finally got to the finish line, what did it include? What were some of the key components of the final bill?
Well, Philip, this was a very large omnibus bill, and it included several components. Some of the key components were providing needed support to the clean nuclear fleet in Illinois, significantly expanding funding for renewables, expanding and extending our energy efficiency offerings, giving utilities a new rate-making structure to work within, and it includes several provisions around equity, customer assistance, and ethics.
Thanks, Michael. And since we're here to talk about electrification today, what does the new law have regarding that component of the clean energy transition? And why are these provisions important?
Well, Philip, an aspect of the new law that is definitely very important to us at ComEd are the beneficial electrification provisions, which are aimed at supporting the transition to clean electric technologies, including electric vehicles for our customers and communities. This is important to us because electrification is a significant opportunity to improve air quality and decrease carbon emissions. We have all been a part of the significant strides Illinois has made to clean up the electric power sector, resulting in a more than 30% reduction in carbon emissions from that sector since 2005. We have not, however, done much at all to address emissions from the transportation sector, which now accounts for over a third of all carbon emissions in the state. We need to start and accelerate that work now. In addition to the climate impacts of those emissions, fossil-based transportation has resulted in devastating air pollution and public health impacts, especially for our low to moderate income communities. There is a clear and urgent need to act, and transportation electrification gives us a unique, powerful opportunity to help improve conditions in our communities. So to your question, Philip, what does the new law do? First, it sets a goal of 1 million electric vehicles on the road in Illinois by 2030. On the one hand, some of us might have hoped for a more ambitious target, but on the other hand, we have less than 60,000 electric vehicles in the state today. So we have a lot of work to do there. The bill then provides us and the state with a suite of pathways through which we can work to help our customers transition to clean transportation, clean heating and cooling for buildings, and all the other clean electric technologies that are being developed. The explicit BE programs include the utility filing of beneficial electrification plans within the Illinois Commerce Commission, the option for utilities to include BE measures within their energy efficiency plans, an EV rebate program administered by the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, and an EV charger rebate program also administered by the Illinois EPA. The BE plan is something that we will file by July of this year. It will be informed by a workshop process that recently concluded at the commission, as to include beneficial electrification programs, incentives, and investments. A little later, Philip, I know you're going to walk us through our approach to that plan filing, and we will discuss what we learned from our stakeholders in the workshop process. Regarding the rebate programs that will be administered by the Illinois EPA, the first one provides for rebates for electric vehicles, prioritizing low-income applicants. The funding for this program seems quite limited since it comes from the Alternate Fuel Fund, which collects user fees to the Secretary of State from fleets of 10 or more non-electric vehicles. That fund currently has around $7 million in it and collects about $2 million per year. The Illinois EPA is still developing the process by which it will make those rebates available to customers. The charging rebate program is targeted towards public and private organizations and could be more promising from a funding perspective, but we will need to wait and see how much money the agency allocates to that program in an upcoming rulemaking.
Thanks for all that information, Michael. And if we could pivot from one capital to another to Washington, D.C., we know that we also had a pretty large federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, that passed recently. Can you briefly tell us about that law and how it will impact the beneficial electrification space in particular?
Absolutely, Philip, and I'm glad you've asked about that. We were happy to see the federal action in this space, although I should note that beneficial electrification components were spread across the IIJA bill, as well as the Build Back Better bill, which stalled, and components of which may or may not resurface in Congress, depending upon who you talk to. I will stick to the bill that became the law, the IIJA. This is a large law with multiple components, including several in the electrification space. Three of the major elements are the ones highlighted on this slide. First, and possibly most importantly, there is the formulaic allocation of almost $150 million to the state of Illinois to deploy charging stations across designated highway corridors. The Illinois Department of Transportation is working to develop a deployment plan with partners including ComEd, with details around how they will execute the goals of the formula funds. State plans are due by August of this year, with funds expected to become available in the fall. There are also a few competitive grant programs that the state of Illinois and other eligible entities can apply for. Those include grant funding for publicly available EV charging infrastructure and grants for zero and low emission school buses. These are exciting programs that we hope will kickstart electrification in the state, reducing range anxiety and helping to accelerate the benefits of cleaner air to school-going children.
Right. And since utilities like ComEd are not eligible to apply for most of these funding streams, What do you see ComEd's role being related to IIJA?
Well, Philip, we're going to play an important role in a few key areas. One, as I mentioned, we will support the state in developing and executing a plan to deploy charging stations along our highways. Second, I think our most important role will be to support our customers who are applying for these funds. We are committed to electrification, and we want our customers and the municipalities and counties that we serve to benefit from this transition. We stand ready to support them in applying for any funds for which they are eligible. And importantly, we also want to think about how our BE plan filing and the programs within it can augment and optimize federal funding to further reduce barriers to adoption for our customers.
Right. Thanks, Michael.
So, Philip, now that we talked about the legislative context, if you don't mind, I'd like to pivot to talking about us, ComEd, and how we plan to help our customers transition to clean transportation. So with this new BE plan provision, can you talk about the approach ComEd is taking to develop its first BE plan filing?
Yes, absolutely. Well, first, I want to say that we at ComEd are really driven by the urgent need to act to address climate change and to improve air quality in the communities that we serve. And our beneficial electrification plan, or BE plan, will be driven by that same overarching goal as well. Beneficial electrification, as all of us are aware, gives us a pretty unique and powerful opportunity to do that. And we were really glad to see that the clean energy law created some new pathways for us to begin unlocking that opportunity. We're also aware of the disproportionate burden that some communities carry when it comes to pollution, as well as the impacts of climate change. And we want to find ways to prioritize benefits for those communities, as well as our low-income customers, to really make sure that they're benefiting from this transition to clean transportation. We also know that the way to accelerate adoption of these technologies is to meaningfully reduce customer barriers to adoption. Many of you are aware of some of the key barriers, and they include the upfront costs, the ability to charge, the ability for all customers to take part in this transition, and the need for increased education, awareness, and guidance to help customers make this transition. And so our plan will be geared toward meaningfully reducing barriers, some of the ones that I mentioned today, but will obviously be shaped by the statute as well as some certain other key considerations.
Understood. So what are those key considerations that are impacting and shaping how we think about our actions in this space, Philip?
There are several key considerations, and I'll walk through a few of them. First, and very important, is the valuable input that we receive from stakeholders and our customers. The ICC, the Illinois Commerce Commission, held a workshop process over the last several months that saw over 100 stakeholders participating in each of the workshop calls. This was a process that was required by statute and resulted in a report that was recently released with recommendations for the utilities to consider when filing their plans before July. The stakeholders in that process gave us a head start thanks to several written idea submissions and many informative presentations. We've also spent time talking to our customers, some of you on the call over the last couple of years, learning about your interest in electrification and the barriers that you face. A second key consideration for us is the impact of federal and state legislation, the pieces of legislation that Michael spoke about today. And the impact of those laws on the barriers to adoption that our customers face and the ones that we're seeking to reduce through our programs and our BE plan. So we need to understand those barriers. We need to understand the size of those barriers, as well as what it might take to overcome those barriers for various customer types and various use cases. And these new laws, the state level rebates, but probably more significantly, the federal IIJA will reshape those barriers, and we need to think through those impacts. A priority for us, and this is a priority that's apparent in the statute, it's one that's apparent in many of the informative and sometimes powerful presentations that we heard from stakeholders in the workshop process, is equity. And the equity considerations that are guiding our thinking include at least three components. One is that we accelerate the health and environmental benefits of electrification to low-income and environmental justice communities. Two, that we create pathways for those communities and customers to own the technologies themselves. And three, that we're also cognizant of the rate impact of programs on those who at present can least afford electrification technologies. And finally, as you already mentioned, Michael, we know that 1/3 of the carbon emissions in our state come from non-transportation end uses in the residential, commercial, and industrial sectors. And beneficial electrification creates opportunities to reduce emissions across all of those areas. And while all of the pertinent technologies might not be mature yet, and customer economics might be somewhat challenged in certain cases, we do want to leverage those opportunities going forward. And that might impact the programs and program design within both our first plan as well as in plan updates going forward.
Thank you, Philip. And I know we have several months before ComEd files its BE plan, but can you tell us where ComEd's current thinking is based on what we've learned about beneficial electrification and what we've heard from stakeholders?
Yes, I'm happy to do that, but I will first repeat your caveat. ComEd will file a BE plan before July 1st, and we're going to continue to develop our proposal leading up to that deadline. But our initial focus areas are the following. One, we recognize that upfront costs remain a significant barrier. And in the absence of the incentives that the Build Back Better bill would have created, it's all the more important to find ways to bring electric vehicles closer to price parity with their fossil fuel incumbents. So we're considering a rebate program for cars, trucks, buses, possibly heat pumps, industrial technologies, with rebate values that reflect the environmental and health benefits enabled by those technologies. With that kind of an approach, a medium or heavy duty vehicle that travels many miles will get a larger rebate. And we think that's appropriate and also reflects the feedback that we received from stakeholders about the importance of focusing on those kinds of vehicles that often ply through some of our low income and environmental justice communities. We will either want to carve out a significant portion of any program or maybe provide a larger rebate for low income customers or customers that are located in or serve environmental justice communities. This is, I think, an important recognition of the disproportionate burden faced by those communities when it comes to air quality as well as the related health impacts. We also recognize that costs associated with charging infrastructure are a barrier, and we're going to explore programs or policies to reduce that barrier. Different charging use cases have different needs, and we're looking at ways to meet those needs. Another key learning from our stakeholder as well as our customer conversations has been the need for education, awareness, and tools to help customers think through their electrification options. We already started down this path with our online EV toolkit for residential customers, as well as a fleet electrification assessment pilot that we conducted a couple of years ago. And we're going to want to expand on those efforts and deploy a range of tools and resources to help customers, including fleets, municipalities, and others, make decisions regarding electrification. And finally, we will want to test tools, technologies, and capabilities. This could include things like vehicle to grid capabilities and the revenues that they create for customers, managed charging capabilities, air quality mapping to gather more granular and locational and actionable data, as well as opportunities to electrify processes around our inland port. So those are some of the key focus areas that we're thinking about right now as we work to finalize this plan that we will file within the next couple of months.
Sounds like a lot. We have a lot of work to do. I appreciate it, Philip. Thank you. And I hope our conversation has been informative for everyone on this webinar. These are exciting times, and we find ourselves at the start of a significant transition towards beneficial electrification here in Illinois. ComEd remains committed to helping our customers make this transition to unleash the significant benefits that come with clean transportation, clean heating and cooling, and clean industrial technologies. For our larger customers, including several of you on this call, these technologies will help you improve your operational efficiency and help you reduce your carbon footprint and meet your own sustainability goals. We are looking forward to helping reduce the adoption barriers you face by partnering with you to optimize federal funding and through the programs in our BE plan. We have a lot of work ahead of us. That is very clear, but it is exciting work that ComEd is committed to. So I want to thank you again on behalf of Philip and myself. And with that, we'll open it up for questions.
All right, thank you, Michael. I'm not seeing any new questions in the chat, but I will respond to the question from the previous panel regarding rebates, and you should have some more information based on the conversation that you just listened to. But the short of it regarding rebates for charging stations. One, we're anticipating the Illinois EPA will statute provide rebates for charging stations. Those rebates will cover up to 80% of the installation costs associated with a charging station. Both private and public entities are eligible for those rebates. We're still waiting to find out what the funding might look like. Our understanding so far is that the Illinois EPA will be using some Rebuild Illinois funds. We believe it's $70 million that they will allocate across however many years they plan to provide this rebate program. So more to come on that. Illinois EPA will release information. They'll have a formal rulemaking proceeding that will give all of us a lot more information about what those rebates might look like. Additionally, we talked about the federal IIJA Act, some of the provisions within that piece of legislation. Obviously, we're going to hear more from the state and from the Illinois Department of Transportation about their deployment plan regarding deploying charging stations across highway corridors in the state of Illinois. There also is funding for charging stations in other more underserved areas. Some more to come on both of those opportunities later this year. The state's deployment plan that they're developing, they need to submit that to the Federal Department of Transportation by August 1st ahead of the disbursement of funds. So there's a lot happening in these coming few months. And then we spoke about our beneficial electrification plan, the ComEd BE plan that we will file by July 1st. And as we mentioned, we do anticipate proposing rebate programs within that plan, which would help reduce upfront costs, whether it's for the vehicles themselves or the chargers for our customers. And we're also really looking very closely at make-ready costs, right? The costs associated with installing charging stations and trying to develop the right programs or policies to help alleviate some of those barriers as well. I do see a couple of other questions that have come in the chat from Dave Conway. Are there going to be rebates for school districts? So the same rebate programs that I referred to would apply to school districts as well. We are very aware of the huge opportunity that electrifying school buses provides for us here in the service territory to accelerate electrification and its benefits, especially to school-going children. We also see this as an opportunity to enable a more equitable transition to electrification, right? School buses across the service territory, including those that serve low-income communities, are a significant opportunity. And so we're looking at that. We do anticipate that within our BE plan filing, we will have specific programs and rebates that will help schools, school bus operators who are looking to electrify. Another question, will local government-owned facilities also have access to EV charging infrastructure rebates as ComEd customers? Yes, absolutely. Obviously, we're still in the process of designing the programs that we will include in the plan. There will be some programs that might be specific to residential customers, but anything that is open to other larger customers, commercial industrial customers, would also apply to our municipalities and other government entities. And then finally, there's another question about schools, which I believe I addressed already, but that reminds me of there are a whole lot of other opportunities regarding school buses. So IIJA does have funds that are specifically earmarked for electrifying school buses. The Illinois Environmental Protection Agency also has a couple of grant programs where they are using some of the Volkswagen settlement funds and making that available to school districts and school bus operators to electrify school buses. All right, I'll take this last question before we transition to our closing. What is the percentage of electricity generated from wind, solar, and other clean energy? Well, here in Northern Illinois, we are able to match over 94% of the load in our service territory with clean and renewable energy that is generated within our service territory. We also know, based on the very bold targets set out in the statute, that we're going to see significant growth of renewable energy over the next 10 to 20 years. So we anticipate getting cleaner and being able to provide our customers with more and more renewable energy over the next 2 decades. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Diana Sharp, who is our Vice President of Large Customer Services, to close us out today. Thank you again for having us. Really enjoy having this time talking to our customers about something that's very important to all of us. And with that, I'll hand it to you, Diana.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on beneficial electrification. I'm Diana Sharp, Vice President of Large Customer Operations. This webinar reflects our commitment to be a resource for you on issues and emerging technologies that are important to your business and to ensuring a cleaner energy future in Illinois. Beneficial electrification, and specifically fleet electrification, is a perfect example. At ComEd, delivering reliable, clean, and affordable energy is job one. We've made considerable progress in these areas because of the smart grid and other investments in recent years. And because of the smart grid platform, we are able to play a leading role in the clean energy transition through the integration of more renewables. As you've heard, you have more opportunities than ever to reduce energy consumption and costs, contribute to a cleaner environment in your communities, and enhance your business performance. We know many of you will want to pursue these opportunities, maybe in conjunction with new construction, an expansion project, or a renovation. As your energy partner, we urge you to engage us early in the process so that together we can create a solution that best meets your unique needs and interests. We hope that today's discussion about the Illinois Clean Energy Law was helpful to you in understanding how it benefits our state and how it can benefit you. Beneficial electrification is a unique and powerful opportunity. Between our state's new energy law and the federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, you are in a position to unlock that opportunity, and we will help you every step of the way. As a takeaway from today's discussion, we will provide information sheets about the timeline for typical power requirements and the route for success. Thank you again for joining us on this drive to a cleaner energy future.